The moment my Uncle Marcus stood up at that anniversary dinner, champagne glass raised high, I knew exactly what was coming. His voice carried across the crystal and silver like a blade wrapped in velvet. He had that particular smile, the one that looked generous to strangers but cut deep for family. Around me, the Blake family glittered in their finest diamonds catching candlelight, silk rustling with old money confidence. And there I sat in my department store dress, the only one without a second home or a European car parked outside. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus cleared his throat, eyes landing on me with theatrical precision. Let's go around the table and share what we're grateful for this year. I'll start. I'm grateful for another record-breaking quarter at Blake Industries. Brandon here just closed the Singapore deal. Diane's charity gala raised $2 million. Everyone at this table has contributed something extraordinary to our family legacy. He paused, let the silence stretch like a rubber band about to snap. Well, almost everyone. Some of us are still finding our way. The room swallowed its collective breath. My mother's hand froze halfway to her wine glass. Brandon smirked into his napkin. Natalie studied her perfectly manicured nails. And me? I just smiled. That small, quiet smile I'd learned from my grandfather William, the one that said more than words ever could. Because at that exact moment my phone buzzed in my clutch. A single notification that would rewrite everything Marcus thought he knew about power, about wealth, about which Blake really mattered. But I didn't check it. Not yet. I let Marcus finish his speech, let him bask in his moment of superiority. Let him believe just a little longer that he'd won. I learned a long time ago that silence can be the most devastating response to cruelty. My grandfather William taught me that. He used to say that people who need to announce their importance are usually the ones least secure in it. Real power, Tori, he'd whisper to me when I was young. Real power is so quiet you don't hear it coming until it's already changed everything. I thought about those words as Marcus finally sat down, looking pleased with himself, as if he'd just delivered some profound wisdom instead of a thinly veiled insult. The anniversary dinner continued around me like a performance I was no longer part of. Servers glided between chairs with plates that cost more than my monthly rent. Conversations bubbled up about vacation homes in Aspen, about art acquisitions, about the kind of problems that only exist when you have too much money and too little purpose. My cousin Brandon leaned back in his chair, swirling his scotch with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his entire life. He caught my eye and raised his glass in mock salute. Don't take it personally, Tori. Uncle Marcus just calls it like he sees it. You've always been different from the rest of us. Different. That was the word they'd used my whole life. Different because I chose teaching over finance. Different because I drove a 10-year-old Honda instead of a Mercedes. Different because I'd rather spend my weekends volunteering at the community center than attending country club events. Different because after my father died when I was 12, I'd watched my mother slowly fade into the background of this family, becoming quieter and smaller until she was barely there at all. I'd promised myself I'd never let that happen to me. The Blake family estate in Greenwich stretched across 8 acres of manicured perfection. Every hedge trimmed to geometric precision. Every stone in the driveway placed with intention. The house itself was a monument to excess. All white columns and floor-to-ceiling windows that seemed designed to let everyone see just how much the Blakes had accumulated. Growing up, I'd spent summers here, back when grandfather William was still alive. Back when these halls felt less like a museum and more like a home. He'd been different from the rest of them. Self-made, quiet about his wealth, more interested in teaching me chess than showing off his portfolio. He'd built Blake Industries from nothing, turned a small trading company into an international conglomerate. But somewhere along the way, after he'd handed the reins to his sons, the company had become something else. It had become a measuring stick, a way to rank family members by their net worth and contributions. And by that measure, I'd always come up short. My phone buzzed again in my clutch. I could feel it vibrating against my hip, insistent. But I didn't reach for it. Not while Marcus was watching me with those sharp eyes, waiting to see if his words had landed. Not while the entire table had gone quiet, conversations dying out as everyone processed the awkwardness of what had just happened. Instead, I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip. Let the moment breathe. Let them wonder what I was thinking. Diane, Marcus's wife, attempted to smooth over the tension with the kind of brittle cheerfulness that only made things worse. Well, I think it's wonderful that Victoria has found her passion in education. Not everyone needs to work in the family business. The subtext was clear. Not everyone is capable of working in the family business. My mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Victoria has always been very dedicated to her students. It was the most she'd defended me in years. A single sentence that somehow made me feel more alone than Marcus's insult had. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that I didn't need her protection. But the truth was, some part of me still wished she'd stand up, slam her hand on the table, and tell Marcus exactly where he could shove his opinions about my life choices. That version of my mother had died with my father, though. What remained was this ghost who attended family functions and agreed with whatever kept the peace. Brandon's wife Natalie leaned forward, her diamond necklace catching the light. I think teaching is very noble. How much do teachers make these days? Somewhere around 50,000. It must be challenging to make ends meet on that salary. The sympathy in her voice was worse than outright mockery. I met her eyes steadily. I managed just fine. But surely you must think about your future. Retirement, property ownership, building wealth. Uncle Marcus was just saying last week how important it is for every Blake to secure their financial independence. The irony of a woman who'd never worked a day in her life lecturing me about financial independence wasn't lost on anyone at the table. But this was how they operated. Death by 1,000 cuts. Each comment individually deniable, but collectively devastating. My phone buzzed a third time. Whoever was trying to reach me wasn't giving up. I glanced down at my clutch, just for a second, and caught Brandon watching me. He'd always been observant in the way predators are, constantly scanning for weakness. "You expecting an important call?" he asked, voice dripping with false concern. "Just my banker," I said lightly. "Nothing that can't wait." The table erupted in laughter. Even my mother smiled, though hers was pained. "Your banker," Marcus repeated, as if I'd just told the funniest joke he'd heard all year. "That's rich, Tori. That's really rich." I let them laugh. Let them think I was making some self-deprecating joke about my modest finances. Let them believe they knew everything about my life, my choices, my circumstances. Because the truth was, they knew nothing. They'd stopped paying attention to me years ago, right around the time they decided I wasn't worth the effort. I'd become invisible to them, just another disappointing Blake who'd failed to live up to the family's standards. And that invisibility, I was beginning to realize, might have been the greatest gift they'd ever given me. The servers brought out the main course, some elaborate preparation of beef that probably cost more per plate than I spent on groceries in a month. Conversation shifted to safer topics. The stock market. Upcoming board meetings. Brandon's plans to expand Blake Industries into emerging markets. I cut my food into small pieces and chewed slowly, playing the role they expected. The poor relation. The charity case. The one they tolerated out of obligation but never truly welcomed. Across the table, my mother caught my eye. For just a moment I saw something flicker there. Regret maybe. Or recognition. As if she suddenly saw herself in me, saw the path she'd taken after my father died. The way she'd let this family diminish her until she'd forgotten she was ever anything more than Robert Blake's widow. I wanted to reach across the table and take her hand. Tell her it wasn't too late. Tell her we could both walk out of here right now and never look back. But I knew she wouldn't come. She'd made her peace with being small. Had convinced herself that acceptance, even conditional acceptance, was better than standing alone. I'd made a different choice. After college, when Marcus had offered me a token position at Blake Industries, some meaningless role with an impressive title and no real responsibility, I'd turned him down. The shock on his face had been almost comical. No one turned down a Blake opportunity. No one chose a teacher's salary over a six-figure corporate position. But I had. Because I'd learned something important from watching my mother fade away. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'd learned that some prices are too high to pay. That keeping your sense of self intact matters more than keeping your place at the family table. That being poor in pocket is infinitely better than being poor in spirit. My phone buzzed again. Fourth time. This was getting ridiculous. I excused myself from the table, mumbling something about the restroom. Marcus barely looked up. In the hallway, I finally pulled out my phone. 7 missed calls. All from the same number. A Zurich area code I recognized immediately. My heart started beating faster. I'd only given this number to one person. Mr. Harrison Fletcher. My grandfather's private banker. The calls had started coming in right as Marcus began his speech. The timing was almost poetic. I stepped into the library, my grandfather's favorite room in the whole estate. The walls were lined with first editions and leather-bound classics. A massive desk dominated one corner, and above the fireplace hung a portrait of William Blake in his prime. Stern-faced, clear-eyed, looking like a man who'd built empires and had no patience for fools. I dialed Fletcher's number with shaking hands. He answered on the first ring. "Miss Blake, I've been trying to reach you for the past hour." His accent was crisp, efficient, the kind of voice that managed trillions without ever raising its volume. "I apologize," I said. "I'm at a family dinner." "I see. Well, this cannot wait. The transfer has been completed." I felt the air leave my lungs. The transfer. We'd been planning it for 3 months. Ever since Fletcher had contacted me on my 30th birthday with information that had turned my entire understanding of my life upside down. "Your grandfather's trust has fully matured," Fletcher continued. "As per his instructions, the funds have been consolidated and wired to your primary account. The total sum is $1.2 billion. I sat down hard in my grandfather's leather chair. I'd known this was coming. Had been preparing for it, working with Fletcher to understand the scope of what my grandfather had done. But hearing the number spoken aloud, knowing it was real, that it was mine, that everything was about to change, that was different. "The secondary assets will transfer over the next 48 hours, Fletcher went on. "The real estate portfolio, the stock holdings, the trust funds he established in your name. Miss Blake, are you still there?" "I'm here," I managed. "Just processing." Fletcher's voice softened slightly. "Your grandfather was very specific in his instructions. He wanted you to have nothing until you turned 30. He wanted to ensure you built your own identity, made your own choices, became your own person before the weight of his fortune could influence you. He also wanted to make certain that the rest of your family had no idea this existed." Tears pricked at my eyes. That sounded exactly like something William Blake would do. He'd always been playing a longer game than anyone realized. "How much do they know?" I asked. "Nothing," Fletcher confirmed. "Your grandfather set up the trust through a separate entity, completely divorced from Blake Industries. As far as your family is concerned, you inherited nothing when he passed. The bulk of his estate went into the company which they control. They have no idea about the private accounts, the international holdings, the investments he made outside the family business. For 15 years, since my grandfather's death when I was 15, I'd believed I'd been left out of his will. Marcus had made sure to tell me that, had delivered the news with barely concealed satisfaction. Your grandfather felt that his estate should go to those who'd contributed to building the family legacy. I'm sure you understand, Tori." And I had understood. Had accepted it as confirmation of what I'd always suspected, that I wasn't really part of this family. That my father's early death had somehow erased my claim to the Blake name. But William Blake had been playing a different game entirely. He'd hidden his real fortune, the wealth he'd accumulated before Blake Industries even existed, before his sons had gotten their hands on his empire. And he'd left all of it to me, with one condition, that I couldn't touch it until I was 30 years old. Until I'd had time to become whoever I was going to be, without the corrupting influence of knowing I was rich. "Miss Blake," Fletcher said gently, "I know this is overwhelming. Take whatever time you need. But I should inform you that the wire transfer will show up in your account within the hour. You may want to be somewhere private when you check your balance." I looked up at my grandfather's portrait. His eyes seemed to bore into me, challenging me. "What are you going to do now, Tori? Who are you going to become?" "Thank you, Mr. Fletcher," I said. "I'll call you tomorrow to discuss next steps." "One more thing," he added. "Your grandfather left a letter. It's been in my possession for 15 years. With instructions to deliver it to you once the trust matured. I've just sent it to your email. I'd suggest you read it before you rejoin your family." We ended the call. My hands were trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I opened my email, scrolled past the usual junk, and found Fletcher's message. The subject line simply read, "From William Blake." The attachment took a moment to load. Then my grandfather's handwriting filled the screen, strong and clear despite his age when he'd written it. "My dearest Tori, if you're reading this, I've been gone for 15 years and you've just turned 30. I hope these years have been kind to you. I hope you've found your purpose, your passion, your path. I hope you've become exactly who you were meant to be, without the burden of my money weighing down your choices." The letter went on for pages. He explained how he'd watched his sons, my uncles, become corrupted by wealth. How Marcus in particular had developed a cruel streak, using money as a weapon to control and diminish others. How he'd seen my mother lose herself after my father died. Had watched her become a shadow in the family she'd married into. He wrote about his fears for me, about how he'd seen something special in me, something that reminded him of himself before the money came. A fierce independence. A moral clarity. A refusal to compromise on the things that mattered. "I could have split my fortune equally among my children and grandchildren," he wrote. "But I knew what would happen. Marcus would use it to tighten his grip on the family. Your mother would give hers away to keep the peace. And you, my darling girl, you would be crushed under the weight of their expectations. So I made a different choice. I hid the real fortune, the one I built before Blake Industries, before I became the man everyone wanted something from. I invested it carefully, grew it quietly, and put it all in a trust with your name on it. But I made you wait. I made you grow up thinking you had nothing. And I know that was hard. I know Marcus probably lorded it over you. I know the family probably made you feel less than. But I needed you to discover who you were without my money defining you. I needed you to build a life based on your own values, not on the size of your trust fund. Now you have both. You have the person you became, and you have the resources to do whatever you want with that person. The question is, what will you choose?" I wiped tears from my face. The letter continued with practical information, details about the trust structure, advice about managing sudden wealth, warnings about how people would treat me differently once they knew. And then, at the end, one final paragraph that made my breath catch. "By now, Marcus has probably said or done something to make you feel small. That's what he does. He measures everyone by their net worth because that's the only measure he understands. When you walk back into that room, you could tell them everything. You could wave your bank statements in their faces and watch them scramble to apologize. Or you could do what I always did. You could let your actions speak louder than your account balance. The choice, as always, is yours. But remember, true power is not about making others feel small. It's about lifting yourself up so high that their opinions can no longer reach you. All my love, Grandfather William." I sat in that library for a long time, letting his words sink in. Outside, I could hear the dinner party continuing. Laughter drifted down the hallway. Someone clinked a glass for a toast. My phone buzzed with a notification from my bank. I didn't need to open it to know what it said. My account balance had just increased by $1.2 billion. I stood up slowly, smoothed down my department store dress, and walked to the mirror that hung beside my grandfather's desk. The woman looking back at me was the same person who'd walked into this house 2 hours ago. Same brown hair pulled back in a simple twist. Same minimal makeup. Same modest outfit. But something in my eyes had changed. There was a certainty there now, a steel core that hadn't existed before. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I was going to walk back into that dining room. I was going to finish my dinner. I was going to smile at Marcus's condescension and Brandon's smirks and Natalie's fake sympathy. And I was going to let them think just a little bit longer that they were better than me. Because my grandfather was right. True power wasn't about proving anything to people like them. True power was knowing you didn't have to. I tucked my phone back into my clutch, took one last look at my grandfather's portrait, and whispered thank you to the empty room. Then I opened the library door and walked back toward the sound of clinking crystal and casual cruelty, carrying $1.2 billion in my pocket like a secret weapon no one would see coming. The game, as they say, was about to change. But this time I was the only one who knew we were playing. I walked back into the dining room with my grandfather's letter burning in my mind, and $1.2 billion sitting in my bank account. The chandeliers cast their golden light across the same scene I'd left minutes ago. Marcus holding court at the head of the table, gesturing with his wine glass as he explained some business strategy to Brandon. Diane nodding along like every word was profound wisdom. Natalie scrolling through her phone with barely concealed boredom. My mother sitting quiet and still, fading into the wallpaper like she always did. No one looked up when I slid back into my seat. I might as well have been invisible. In a way, I suppose I had been invisible to them for years. Just another piece of furniture in the Blake family landscape. Necessary for the appearance of unity, but not worth noticing otherwise. The servers brought out dessert. Some elaborate construction of chocolate and gold leaf that probably required a culinary degree to assemble. I picked up my fork and took a small bite. It tasted like expensive nothing, the kind of food designed to impress rather than satisfy. Around me, the conversation had shifted to upcoming holiday plans. Marcus and Diane were taking their yacht to the Caribbean. Brandon and Natalie had rented a villa in Tuscany. Even my mother mentioned something about a spa retreat in Arizona, though her voice held no real enthusiasm. "And what about you, Tori?" Diane asked with that pointed sweetness that wasn't sweet at all. "Any exciting plans for the holidays? I imagine teacher salaries don't leave much room for exotic vacations." I met her eyes steadily. "Actually, I'm thinking about traveling. Maybe Europe. I've always wanted to see Switzerland." The irony of that statement, given that I'd just received a wire transfer from Zurich, made me want to laugh. But I kept my face neutral, bland. "Switzerland," Brandon said with a snort. "You do know hotels there cost about $500 a night minimum. Maybe try somewhere more budget-friendly. Prague is supposed to be cheap." The casual cruelty in his tone was so familiar it barely registered. This was just how they spoke to me, had spoken to me for as long as I could remember. As if my financial situation was a personal failing rather than a choice I'd made. As if choosing purpose over profit made me somehow less intelligent, less worthy of respect. "I'll keep that in mind," I said quietly. "Thanks for the tip." Marcus leaned back in his chair, surveying the table with the satisfaction of a king reviewing his kingdom. "You know what I love about these family dinners? Seeing everyone thriving, contributing to the Blake legacy in their own way. Brandon's business acumen. Diane's charitable work. Even Patricia here, keeping the family history alive." He gestured to my mother with his wine glass, and she smiled that small, grateful smile of someone thankful to be acknowledged at all. It made me sad and angry in equal measure. My mother had once been formidable. I'd seen pictures of her from before my father died. Vibrant, laughing, full of life. She'd been an artist, had sold paintings in galleries across New England. But after my father's death, something in her had broken. And the Blake family, instead of supporting her grief, had used it. Had convinced her she was helpless without them. Had slowly stripped away every bit of independence she'd had until this was what remained. A woman who smiled gratefully when someone remembered she existed. "Of course," Marcus continued, "not everyone finds their calling right away. Some people need more time to figure out where they fit." His eyes landed on me again, heavy with implication. Take Tori here. Still teaching basic math to teenagers at 30 years old now? But hey, someone's got to do it, right? The table laughed. That same uncomfortable laughter that wasn't quite mean enough to call out, but wasn't kind either. The kind of laughter that eroded your sense of self one dinner party at a time. "I teach economics," actually, I corrected gently, "at Portland Community College. And some of my students are working 2 jobs while trying to get their degrees. They're some of the most dedicated people I've ever met." "How inspiring," Natalie said in a tone that made it clear she found it anything but. "Do you ever think about what you could have done if you'd taken Uncle Marcus up on his offer? You could have been running a whole division by now." The offer. They still brought it up years later, as if it was some incredible opportunity I'd foolishly rejected. As if a made-up position with no real authority, created solely so Marcus could tell people he'd given his poor niece a job, was something I should have been grateful for. I thought about it, I admitted. And then I chose differently. "But why?" my mother asked, and there was genuine confusion in her voice. "Why would you choose struggle when you could have had security?" "Because security isn't worth much if you lose yourself to get it," I said quietly. The table went silent. It was the most honest thing I'd said all evening, and it hung in the air like an accusation. Which I suppose it was. My mother's face flushed. She looked down at her dessert, suddenly very interested in the chocolate ganache. "Well," Marcus said after a long pause, "I suppose we all have different definitions of success. Some of us measure it in impact and legacy. Others measure it in personal satisfaction. Neither is wrong, just different. The condescension in his voice was thick enough to cut. He was giving me an out, a way to interpret my choices as valid in their own small way. How generous of him. How magnanimous. I felt something shift in my chest. A door closing on the part of me that had ever cared what Marcus Blake thought about anything. Thank you for that perspective, Uncle Marcus, I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. It's always illuminating to hear how you view the world. He frowned slightly, not quite sure if I just insulted him. Before he could respond, the servers began clearing dessert plates. The dinner was winding down. Soon people would migrate to the parlor for coffee and brandy. The evening would stretch on for another hour or two of polite conversation and casual cruelty before everyone finally went home. My phone buzzed again. I glanced at it under the table. An email from Fletcher with the subject line, "Additional assets transferred." Attached was a preliminary list of properties now in my name. A penthouse in Manhattan. A cottage in the Cotswolds. A villa in Lake Como. A ski chalet in Aspen. Real estate my grandfather had acquired over decades, held in trusts with names that meant nothing to anyone but him and his private banker. All of it mine now. All of it completely unknown to the people sitting around this table, measuring their wealth in cars and jewelry and stock portfolios. I thought about my grandfather's letter, about his challenge. What was I going to do with this power? How was I going to use it? The easy path would be to stand up right now, pull out my phone, show them my bank balance and watch their faces crumble. Watch Marcus's superiority drain away. Watch Brandon's smirk disappear. Watch Diane and Natalie stumble over themselves to suddenly be warm and welcoming. It would feel good for about 30 seconds. And then what? Then I'd be just like them. Using money as a weapon. Measuring my worth by the size of my accounts. Letting wealth define who I was and how I moved through the world. My grandfather hadn't spent 15 years hiding his fortune from me, just so I could become another version of Marcus Blake. He'd done it so I could become something better. The question was, what did better look like? I excused myself again, this time genuinely needing air. I walked through the French doors onto the terrace. The November night was cold and clear. Stars visible despite the ambient light from the house. I could hear the Long Island sound in the distance. Waves against the shore in a rhythm that had nothing to do with money or family, or the complicated weight of sudden wealth. My phone rang. Fletcher again. I answered. "Miss Blake, I wanted to confirm you received the asset transfer notification." "I did," I said. "It's a lot to process." "Indeed. Your grandfather was a meticulous planner. Every property, every investment, every asset was chosen with great care. He wanted to ensure you had not just wealth but options. The kind of freedom that comes from true financial independence." There was a pause, and then Fletcher continued in a more personal tone. "If I may speak candidly, I knew your grandfather for 30 years. He was one of the most principled men I've ever worked with. He despised ostentation and cruelty. He believed wealth was a tool, not an identity. I think he'd want you to know that you don't have to decide everything tonight. You can take your time. Figure out who you want to be now that the circumstances have changed." "Thank you," I said softly. "That helps." "One more thing," Fletcher added. "Your grandfather established several charitable trusts in conjunction with your inheritance. Organizations supporting education, women's empowerment, financial literacy. He wanted you to have the option of doing good with this money, of building something meaningful. The boards are waiting for your direction." Of course he did. Of course my grandfather thought 10 steps ahead. He hadn't just given me money. He'd given me purpose, direction, a framework for using wealth in ways that mattered. We said our goodbyes and I ended the call. Behind me, I heard the terrace door open. I turned, expecting my mother or maybe Diane coming to deliver some additional passive-aggressive comment. Instead, it was Brandon. He walked over to the railing, standing a few feet away from me. For a moment, we both just looked out at the darkness. "Look," he said finally, "I know tonight was rough. Uncle Marcus gets carried away sometimes. He doesn't mean anything by it." I raised an eyebrow. "Doesn't he?" Brandon shifted uncomfortably. "He just worries about you. We all do. Your family. You're supposed to be taken care of." And in his mind, that means working for Blake Industries, living in Greenwich, being part of the machine. I turned to face him fully. And what do you think, Brandon? Do you worry about me? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he said, honestly, sometimes I envy you. The words hung between us like a confession. I blinked, genuinely surprised. You envy me? He laughed. But there was no humor in it. You got out. You chose something real. I'm 32 years old and I've never made a single decision that wasn't about the company, about the family expectations, about maintaining the Blake legacy. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have looked like if I'd had the guts to do what you did. It was the most honest thing Brandon had ever said to me. For a moment I saw past the arrogance and the smirking and the casual cruelty. I saw someone who was just as trapped as my mother, just in a different kind of cage. But then the moment passed. He straightened up, put the mask back on. Anyway, don't take tonight personally. Family dinners are always a little intense. I nodded slowly. Thanks for that, Brandon. He went back inside, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my secrets. I stayed out there for another 10 minutes, letting the cold air clear my head. Inside, I could see everyone gathering in the parlor. Marcus in his leather chair by the fireplace. Diane perched on the sofa. Natalie showing someone something on her phone. My mother sitting slightly apart from everyone, present but not really there. This was my family. Flawed, cruel, broken in ways they didn't even recognize. And somewhere in the past few hours I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to tell them about the money. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. Not because I was ashamed or afraid, but because my grandfather was right. Real power wasn't about proving anything to people who'd already decided what you were worth. I walked back inside and rejoined the group. Marcus was telling a story about some business deal, embellishing his own role in ways that probably departed significantly from reality. I poured myself coffee and sat down, letting the conversation wash over me. At some point, Diane asked about my work again, probably having forgotten she'd already mocked it earlier. I talked about my students, about the woman in my evening class who was 50 years old and getting her degree after raising 4 children. About the young man who'd fled violence in his home country and was now studying to be an engineer. About the single father working night shifts and taking classes during the day because he wanted a better life for his daughter. How wonderful, Diane said in that empty way that meant she'd stopped listening halfway through. You must feel very fulfilled. I do, I said simply. More fulfilled than I'd feel managing a stock portfolio or sitting in board meetings. The jab was subtle enough that she couldn't quite call me on it, but I saw Marcus's jaw tighten. He didn't like implications that his way of life wasn't the pinnacle of achievement. The evening finally wound down around 10. People started making noises about early mornings and long drives. I hugged my mother goodbye, held her a little longer than usual. She felt so small in my arms, so fragile. I wanted to tell her everything. Wanted to say that we didn't have to keep doing this, that there was enough money now for both of us to be free. But I knew she wouldn't come. She'd made her peace with this life. The cage door was open, but she no longer remembered how to fly. Marcus walked me to the door, playing the gracious host. It was good to see you, Tori. Even if we don't always see eye to eye, you're still family. I know tonight might have seemed harsh, but I only push you because I see potential. It's not too late, you know. The offer still stands. You could join Blake Industries. Start building real wealth. I looked up at him, this man who'd spent years making me feel less than, who'd used money as a measuring stick for human worth, who had no idea that I was now wealthier than he'd ever be. I appreciate the offer, Uncle Marcus, I said with perfect politeness. But I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. He patted my shoulder with the kind of condescension reserved for children and people he considered his inferiors. Well, the door's always open. Just remember, there's no shame in admitting when you need help. I walked to my Honda in the circular driveway, parked between Brandon's Tesla and Diane's Range Rover. As I unlocked the door, I caught my reflection in the window. Same person, same car, same modest clothes, but everything had changed. I drove back toward Portland through the empty Connecticut highways, my mind racing faster than the car. By the time I crossed into Massachusetts, I'd made several decisions. First, I wasn't quitting my job. My students needed me, and honestly, I needed them. They reminded me every day that wealth and worth were entirely separate things. Second, I was going to keep living in my apartment. At least for now. Not because I couldn't afford something better, but because I wanted to make sure that when I changed my circumstances it was for the right reasons. Not to prove anything to the Marcus Blakes of the world, but because it genuinely made my life better. Third, and most importantly, I was going to use this money the way my grandfather intended. To build something meaningful. To create opportunities for people like my students who were working twice as hard for half the recognition. To prove that wealth could be a tool for good instead of a weapon for maintaining power. The highway stretched ahead of me, dark and endless. Somewhere in Zurich, Fletcher was probably sleeping, having completed his duty to my grandfather. Somewhere in Greenwich, my family was probably still awake, rehashing the evening, maybe even talking about poor Tori and her disappointing life choices. And somewhere in the universe, I like to think my grandfather was smiling, because he'd played the longest game of all. He'd taught me to value myself without money, so that when the money came, I'd know exactly what it was worth. Not everything. Just something. A tool. An opportunity. A chance to build the life I actually wanted instead of the life everyone expected. My phone buzzed with another message. This time it wasn't Fletcher. It was an automated notification from my bank. Your account balance has been updated. Current available balance: $1,200,473,612.18. I pulled over at a rest stop and just sat there, staring at the numbers. It was real. All of it was real. I wasn't the poorest Blake anymore. I was the richest one. And absolutely no one knew except me. I started laughing then, sitting alone in my old Honda at a rest stop somewhere on I-95. Laughing until tears ran down my face. Not from joy exactly, though there was some of that, but from the sheer absurdity of it all. From the cosmic joke of Marcus telling me I was the poorest person at that table while my bank account held more money than everyone in that room combined. From the realization that I'd spent years feeling less than, feeling inadequate, feeling like I'd failed somehow by choosing teaching over finance. When all along, my grandfather had been orchestrating this moment. This exact moment of understanding that their opinions had never mattered at all. I wiped my eyes and pulled back onto the highway. Portland was still 3 hours away. I had time to think. Time to plan. Time to figure out exactly what Victoria Blake was going to become now that the game had changed. But one thing I knew for certain. When I walked into my classroom Monday morning, I'd still be Professor Blake. Still wearing my department store clothes. Still driving my 10-year-old Honda. Still helping students figure out compound interest and amortization schedules. Because that's who I'd become in the 15 years since my grandfather died. Someone who measured success not in dollars, but in the light that came into a student's eyes when they finally understood a difficult concept. Someone who knew that real wealth was freedom, purpose, and the ability to sleep at night knowing you hadn't compromised yourself for anyone's approval. The money was just going to make it easier to be that person on a bigger scale. The highway mile markers ticked by. Connecticut gave way to Massachusetts. The night deepened, and I drove forward into whatever came next, carrying my secret like a superpower no one could see. Marcus had been wrong about so many things, but he'd been right about one. This anniversary dinner had been historic, just not for the reasons he thought. It was the night Victoria Blake stopped caring what anyone thought she was worth, because she finally knew the answer. And it had nothing to do with the number in her bank account. The next morning I woke up in my small Portland apartment and had to check my phone 3 times to make sure the previous night hadn't been some elaborate dream. But no, the bank balance was still there. Still real. Still impossible. I made coffee in my ancient coffee maker, the one that had been threatening to die for the past year. Sat at my tiny kitchen table with its mismatched chairs. Looked out the window at the gray November morning and the street below where people were heading to work, to school, to whatever their Saturday held. My phone rang. It was my mother. For a moment I considered not answering. I wasn't ready to pretend everything was fine. Wasn't ready to act like last night had been just another family dinner. But old habits die hard. Picked up. Tori, honey, my mother's voice was soft, apologetic. I wanted to call and check on you. Last night was difficult. I know Marcus can be harsh sometimes. Sometimes I repeated, Mom, he's harsh all the time. To both of us. And you just sit there and take it. There was a long silence. Then so quietly I almost didn't hear it, what else am I supposed to do? The defeat in her voice broke my heart. Leave, I wanted to say. Walk away. You don't need them. Especially now that I have enough money to take care of both of us for the rest of our lives. But I couldn't say that. Not yet. I wasn't ready to tell her. Wasn't sure how she'd react. Whether she'd be happy or horrified or some complicated mix of both. Instead I said, you could remember who you were before Dad died. You were an artist, Mom. You had gallery shows. You traveled. You were someone. I still am someone, she protested weakly. I'm a Blake. No, I said gently. You married a Blake. But you were Patricia Morrison first. You were someone entirely separate from this family. And you could be again if you wanted. Another silence. Then it's too late for that. I'm 62 years old. This is my life now. It's not too late, I insisted. It's never too late to choose yourself. She changed the subject then, asking about my drive back, whether the traffic had been bad, whether I was teaching today. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing important before saying goodbye. After I hung up, I sat there feeling hollow. My mother was so deep in her cage she couldn't even see the bars anymore. And I didn't know how to help her without revealing the secret I wasn't ready to share. I spent the rest of Saturday doing mundane things. Groceries. Laundry. Grading papers. Normal life continuing as if everything hadn't fundamentally shifted. On Sunday I went for a long run, pushing myself until my lungs burned and my legs ached, trying to outrun the strange vertigo of knowing I was a billionaire, while living like someone who budgeted every dollar. That afternoon Fletcher sent another email. This one contained login information for a private client portal. Inside were detailed breakdowns of every asset, every account, every trust. The scope was staggering. My grandfather hadn't just been wealthy. He'd been strategically, deliberately, methodically wealthy. Every investment chosen for long-term growth. Every property selected for either rental income or appreciation potential. Every trust structured to minimize taxes and maximize impact. There were charitable foundations I didn't know existed. Scholarships being given in my grandmother's name to students I'd never met. Grants supporting causes from environmental conservation to women's business development. My grandfather had been quietly changing the world with his money, and he'd left me the tools to continue that work. I spent hours clicking through documents trying to wrap my head around the responsibility of it all. This wasn't just about me being rich. It was about becoming the steward of a legacy built over decades. By evening I'd made more decisions. I was going to meet with Fletcher in person. Next weekend. Fly to Zurich and spend time understanding every aspect of what I now controlled. I was going to keep my teaching job through the end of the semester. My students deserved continuity. After that, I might consider teaching part-time, which would free up hours to focus on the foundation work. And I was going to wait at least 6 months before telling anyone in my family. I wanted time to adjust. Time to make sure I handled this right. Time to become the kind of wealthy person my grandfather would be proud of rather than the kind that had disappointed him so much in his sons. Monday morning I walked into Portland Community College like always. My office was the size of a closet, shared with 2 other adjunct professors. My first class of the day was financial literacy, which felt almost comical given my current situation. I taught 18 and 19-year-olds about building credit, avoiding predatory loans, understanding compound interest. There was something surreal about explaining the importance of saving 10% of your income when I now had more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But my students' questions were real. Their struggles were real. And the information I was giving them genuinely mattered to their futures. In my afternoon class, we had a guest speaker from a local nonprofit that helped low-income families with financial planning. She talked about the barriers to building wealth when you're living paycheck to paycheck. About how poverty isn't a moral failing but a structural problem. About how small interventions, just a few $1,000s at the right time, could completely change someone's trajectory. I sat in the back of the classroom listening. An idea was forming. What if I used some of my grandfather's money to create a fund for students exactly like mine? Not a traditional scholarship based on grades or essays, but emergency grants for people facing crisis. Money for a car repair so someone doesn't lose their job. Money for childcare so a single parent can take that extra class. Money for medical bills that would otherwise force someone to drop out. Small amounts that would be insignificant to me but life-changing for them. By the time the speaker finished, I'd sketched out a rough framework on the back of my syllabus. I call it the William Blake Opportunity Fund. No one in my family would know. It would be completely separate from Blake Industries and the Blake name they all traded on. Just quiet money doing quiet good for people who needed it most. After class, one of my students lingered. Her name was Jessica, a single mother of two who worked night shifts as a CNA and took classes during the day on exactly 3 hours of sleep. Professor Blake, she said hesitantly, I wanted to ask about the extra credit assignment. I know I missed the deadline, but my daughter was sick and I had to use my study time to take care of her, and I really need those points to keep my grade up because I'm on academic probation, and if I fail this class I lose my financial aid. She was talking fast, words tumbling over each other, eyes bright with barely suppressed panic. I held up a hand gently. Jessica, breathe. I can give you an extension. Get me the assignment by Friday. The relief on her face was so profound it nearly broke my heart. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. You have no idea what this means. After she left, I sat alone in my small office and thought about all the Jessicas in the world. People working impossible hours, juggling impossible responsibilities, trying to build better futures on foundations made of sand. People for whom a single unexpected expense could topple everything they'd built. People who just needed someone to give them a break, a moment to breathe, a chance to catch up. I pulled out my laptop and started drafting an email to Fletcher. I wanted to establish the William Blake Opportunity Fund immediately. I'd start with $10 million, enough to help hundreds of students like Jessica, without making a dent in the principal. The fund would offer emergency grants up to $5,000. No questions asked beyond proof of enrollment and demonstration of need. No essays about overcoming adversity. No requirements to maintain a certain GPA. Just help when people needed it most. As I typed, I felt something shift inside me. This was what my grandfather had meant. This was the point of all of it. Not the houses or the cars or the ability to prove Marcus wrong, but the chance to be the person who caught someone before they fell. The person who said yes when everyone else said no. The person who understood that luck and circumstance played a bigger role in success than most wealthy people wanted to admit. I hit send on the email to Fletcher and leaned back in my chair. Outside my tiny office window, students crossed the quad in the fading afternoon light. Most of them worked at least one job. Many worked 2 or 3. They were exhausted, stressed, carrying weight that should never rest on such young shoulders. And soon, without knowing where it came from, some of them would receive help. A mysterious grant that appeared exactly when they needed it most. A small miracle in the form of a wire transfer. I smiled at the thought. My grandfather would have loved this. He'd built his fortune quietly, lived modestly despite his wealth, and given it away in ways that actually mattered. Now I got to continue that tradition. Got to be the invisible hand that lifted people up instead of pushing them down. The week passed in a strange duality. During the day I was Professor Blake. Teaching classes, grading papers, having office hours where students came to me worried about exams and assignments. During the evenings I was Victoria Eleanor Blake, heir to a billion-dollar fortune, reading documents about asset allocation and trust structures, learning the machinery of wealth. Fletcher and I exchanged dozens of emails. He was patient with my questions, thorough in his explanations, and genuinely seemed to approve of my plans for the Opportunity Fund. Your grandfather would be pleased, he wrote. He always believed wealth should create opportunities rather than barriers. By Thursday, the fund was established. By Friday, I'd worked with the college's financial aid office to create a confidential application process. By the following Monday, the first grants were being distributed. Jessica was one of the recipients. She came to my office in tears, holding a letter that informed her she'd received a $5,000 emergency grant for childcare and living expenses. I don't understand, she kept saying. I didn't even know this existed. Who funds this? A private donor who wants to remain anonymous, I told her, which was technically true. They just want to help students like you succeed. She hugged me then, this exhausted young mother who smelled like hospital antiseptic and baby shampoo. Thank you for telling me about it. Thank you for believing I deserve to apply. I hugged her back, blinking away tears of my own. You absolutely deserve it. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. After she left, I had to sit down for a moment. The feeling was overwhelming. $5,000. An amount I could now earn in interest in the time it took to drink a cup of coffee. and it had just completely changed this woman's semester, maybe her entire trajectory. This was power. Real power. Not the kind Marcus wielded in boardrooms making people feel small so he could feel big. But the kind my grandfather had understood. The power to change lives without anyone even knowing you'd done it. That weekend I flew to Zurich. First class, which felt absurd and wonderful in equal measure. The flight attendant brought me champagne and warm nuts and asked if I needed anything else. I almost laughed. What I needed was a manual for how to be suddenly secretly wealthy. What I needed was my grandfather sitting across from me, explaining how to navigate this new world without losing myself in it. Fletcher met me at the airport. He was exactly as I'd imagined from our phone calls. Late 60s, impeccably dressed, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Miss Blake," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "Welcome to Switzerland." We drove into the city in a black Mercedes, passing clean streets and efficient trams and buildings that radiated quiet prosperity. Fletcher's office was in a nondescript building near the lake. Nothing flashy. No gold lettering or marble lobbies. Just a brass plaque that read Fletcher Private Banking, and a security system that probably cost more than most people's houses. His office itself was all dark wood and leather, with windows overlooking Lake Zurich. He poured us coffee from a silver pot and we sat in chairs that were probably older than I was. For the next 3 hours he walked me through everything. The full scope of my grandfather's empire. The properties scattered across continents. The investment portfolio balance between growth and stability. The charitable trusts already doing good work in my name. The legal structures protecting it all from taxes and creditors and family members who might someday discover it existed. "Your grandfather spent 30 years building this," Fletcher explained. "He started long before Blake Industries became successful. He had other ventures, other investments that he kept entirely separate from the family business. He knew his sons would eventually take over the company. He wanted to ensure there was something beyond their reach. Something pure. Why me, I asked. Why not split it among all the grandchildren?" Fletcher smiled slightly. He said you were the only one who'd inherited his character rather than his name. The only one who understood that money was a tool rather than a measure of worth. He watched you grow up, Miss Blake. He saw how Marcus treated you, how the family diminished you. And he knew that if you could build a good life despite having nothing, you'd know exactly what to do when you had everything. We talked about the opportunity fund I'd established. Fletcher approved wholeheartedly and suggested several ways to structure it for maximum impact and tax efficiency. He introduced me to his associate, a woman named Claire who specialized in philanthropic investments. She had ideas about expanding the fund beyond Portland, creating a network of emergency grants at community colleges across the country. By the end of the day, my head was spinning with possibilities. We could help thousands of students every year. Tens of thousands eventually. We could be the invisible safety net that caught people before they fell through the cracks. And we could do it all quietly, without press releases or naming opportunities or any of the ego-driven nonsense that usually accompanied charitable giving. Before I left, Fletcher handed me a slim folder. Inside was a photograph I'd never seen before. My grandfather as a young man, maybe 30, standing outside a small office in what looked like post-war Europe. He looked determined, hungry, ready to take on the world. "He sent this to me when we first started working together," Fletcher said, along with a note that said, "I want to build something that outlasts ego. Something that matters when I'm gone." He paused, then added, "I think he succeeded, don't you?" I looked at the photograph, at this man I'd loved who'd been playing such a long game, who'd sacrificed his relationship with his sons to protect something more important, who'd let me struggle for 15 years so I'd be ready for this moment. "Yes," I said softly. "I think he did." I flew back to Portland on Sunday evening. When I landed, I had a voicemail from my mother. Her voice sounded strained. "Tori, honey, can you call me when you get this? It's important." I called from the airport, sudden worry flooding through me. "Mom, what's wrong? Is everything okay?" There was a long pause. "Then I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me." Another pause. "Did Grandfather William leave you anything? Did he have money we didn't know about?" My heart stopped. "How did you find out?" I asked carefully. "I didn't find out anything," she said. "I'm asking because Marcus came to visit me yesterday, and he was asking strange questions about William's estate. About whether I knew if William had other accounts, other assets beyond what went into the company. He seemed almost paranoid about it. I gripped the phone tighter. What did you tell him? I told him I didn't know anything, which is true. But then I started thinking about you. About how calm you've been lately. How you didn't seem bothered by anything Marcus said at dinner. And I remembered something your grandfather once told me right before he died. He said he was going to make sure you were taken care of. That you'd never have to depend on the Blake family's approval or generosity. I didn't know what he meant at the time. But now I'm wondering. I sat down heavily on an airport bench. People streamed past me with their luggage and their busy lives. I had a choice to make. Lie to my mother and maintain the secret. Or trust her with the truth and risk everything changing. Mom, I said slowly, if I tell you something, can you promise not to tell anyone else? Not Marcus, not Diane, not anyone. Her intake of breath told me she'd already guessed. Oh my God. He did leave you something. How much? I told her. Not the exact amount, but enough. Enough that I'd never have to worry about money again. Enough that I could do whatever I wanted with my life. Enough that Marcus's opinion about my career choices was utterly, completely irrelevant. She was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then very softly she started crying. Mom, are you okay? I'm so glad, she whispered. I'm so glad. You have no idea what it's been like watching you struggle. Knowing I couldn't help you without going through Marcus. Knowing that every dollar I spent was monitored and judged. I wanted to give you money so many times. For your apartment, for your car, for anything. But I couldn't without him knowing. And now you don't need it. Now you're free. The word hung between us. Free. That's what this was, I realized. Not wealth exactly, though it was that too. But freedom. Freedom from judgment, from dependency, from the constant weight of other people's expectations. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. I needed time to adjust, I admitted. To figure out who I was going to be now that everything had changed. And honestly, I wasn't sure how you'd react. If you'd want me to share it with the family or use it to buy my way back into their good graces. Never, she said fiercely, with more emotion than I'd heard from her in years. Don't you dare give them a single cent. They don't deserve it. They've spent years making you feel less than. Let them keep thinking whatever they want to think. There was my mother. The one I remembered from childhood. Strong, certain, protective. She'd been hiding under layers of grief and compliance, but she was still there. I won't, I promised. This is mine. Grandfather William made sure of it. Good, she said. Then, hesitantly, can I ask what you're going to do with it? I told her about the Opportunity Fund. About helping students like Jessica. About the plans to expand it across the country. About wanting to use this wealth the way Grandfather William would have wanted, to create opportunities rather than to showcase status. I could hear the smile in her voice when she spoke again. He chose exactly the right person. You know that, don't you? You're the only one of us who deserved this. We talked for another hour. About my grandfather, about his disappointment in his sons, about the careful planning that had gone into hiding this fortune for decades. About what it meant that Marcus was now asking questions. My mother thought he'd somehow heard rumors. Maybe from someone at Blake Industries who'd noticed irregularities in old financial statements. But she didn't think he knew anything concrete. Not yet. Be careful, she warned before we hung up. Marcus doesn't like mysteries. And he really doesn't like the idea that someone in the family might have resources he can't control. I promised to be cautious. After we said goodbye, I sat in that airport for another 20 minutes processing everything. My mother knew. That changed things. But maybe it changed them for the better. Maybe she needed to know that escape was possible, even if she wasn't ready to take it herself. The next few weeks settled into a new rhythm. Teaching during the day, managing my growing wealth in the evenings. The Opportunity Fund was already making a difference. I heard stories from the financial aid office about students who'd been on the verge of dropping out, who'd received grants that let them continue. A single father who could finally afford car repairs. A woman who could pay for her daughter's medical expenses without choosing between that and tuition. A young man who could quit one of his 3 jobs and actually have time to study. Each story felt like a small victory. Like proof that my grandfather's long game had been worth it. In early December, Marcus called me. Not my mother, me directly. Which was unusual enough to set off alarm bells. Victoria, His voice was friendly, but I could hear the calculation underneath. I wanted to catch up with you. See how you're doing. Maybe take you to lunch when you're next in Connecticut. I'm pretty busy with end of semester stuff, I said carefully. Maybe after the holidays? He pressed. I was hoping sooner. There are some family matters I'd like to discuss with you. Family financial matters. My stomach tightened. What kind of financial matters? Just some irregularities I've noticed in old estate documents, he said smoothly. Nothing to worry about. But I'm trying to get a complete picture of Grandfather William's holdings, and I thought you might have some insights. I don't know anything about his holdings, I said truthfully. He didn't discuss financial matters with me. There was a pause. Then did he leave you anything, Tori? Anything at all that maybe wasn't processed through the main estate? The question hung in the air like a trap. I thought about lying. But I'd never been good at it, and Marcus was skilled at detecting deception. Why would he have done that? I asked instead. You told me years ago that his estate went entirely to Blake Industries. That I inherited nothing because I hadn't contributed to the family legacy. Remember? Another pause. Yes, well, I'm beginning to think there might have been assets we weren't aware of. Private accounts, perhaps. Or trusts established under different names. If you know anything about that, now would be the time to say so. I felt a chill run down my spine. He was fishing, but he was getting closer to the truth than was comfortable. Uncle Marcus, I said firmly, I don't know anything about hidden assets or private accounts. Grandfather William never discussed his finances with me. If you have questions about his estate, maybe you should talk to his lawyers or bankers. I've tried, he said, frustration bleeding through. But there are walls everywhere. Confidentiality agreements, sealed records, foreign banks that won't respond to inquiries. It's almost like he deliberately made it impossible to trace, which makes me think he was hiding something. And if he was hiding something, I want to know what it was and where it went. He paused. You're sure he never mentioned anything to you? Nothing at all? I'm sure I lied. There was a long silence. Then Marcus said, in a tone that was trying for casual but missing by a mile, you seem different lately. More confident. Like something's changed. Have you come into money somehow? I teach at a community college, Uncle Marcus. Where exactly would I have come into money? He laughed, but it was forced. Of course. Silly question. It's just that your mother mentioned you were talking about traveling, and I thought perhaps you'd gotten a raise or a better job offer. Just a cost of living adjustment, I said. Nothing dramatic. We ended the call shortly after, but my hands were shaking. Marcus was suspicious. And a suspicious Marcus was a dangerous thing. He'd built his career on uncovering information other people wanted hidden. He wouldn't stop digging until he found something. I called Fletcher immediately. He listened to my summary of the conversation without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, your grandfather anticipated this. The entire structure was designed to be impenetrable from the outside. Marcus can dig all he wants. He'll find nothing that connects you to these assets. Everything is held through trusts with different names, managed by foreign banks with strict privacy laws. Unless you choose to reveal it, he'll never know. But what if he confronts me directly? What if he accuses me of hiding something? Then you tell him the truth, Fletcher said calmly. That your grandfather's financial affairs are none of your business or his. That if William Blake wanted certain information kept private, that was his right. And that Marcus's obsession with tracking down every last dollar says more about him than it does about you. I felt some of the tension ease from my shoulders. You're right. Of course you're right. Miss Blake, Fletcher continued, your grandfather dealt with people like Marcus his entire life. People who believed money was the only thing that mattered, who measured every relationship by what they could extract from it. He knew exactly how they thought. And he knew how to stay 10 steps ahead of them. Trust in the system he built. Trust in the protections he put in place. And most importantly, trust in your own right to privacy. What William Blake chose to do with his money is no one's concern but his and yours. We talked for a few more minutes about additional security measures. Ways to ensure that even if Marcus somehow found a thread to pull, it wouldn't unravel anything important. By the time we hung up, I felt steadier. But I also knew something had shifted. The secret wouldn't stay secret forever. Not with Marcus actively looking for answers. The question was, when it finally came out, what would I do? How would I handle the inevitable confrontation? Finals week arrived with its usual chaos. Students stressed about exams, desperate for grade calculations, pleading for extensions and extra credit opportunities. I stayed late every night, holding review sessions and office hours, trying to help as many people as possible succeed. Jessica came by on the last day of classes. She brought me a card, handmade by her daughters. It had a drawing of a superhero with a cape, and the words "Thank you, Professor Blake, for saving our mommy." "I'm not a superhero," I told her, though my eyes were definitely watering. "Yes, you are," she insisted. "That grant changed everything. I can take day classes next semester instead of just squeezing them between shifts. I can actually sleep sometimes. My kids can have a normal schedule. You saved us." After she left, I sat in my office and cried. Not sad tears, but overwhelmed ones. This was why my grandfather had done it. Not so I could buy expensive things or live in a mansion or prove Marcus wrong, but so I could be the person who changed Jessica's life. So I could catch people when they fell. So I could use wealth as a tool for good instead of a weapon for control. The semester ended. I submitted my grades and cleaned out my office for winter break. As I was packing up my things, my phone buzzed with a text from Brandon. "Family dinner at the estate on Christmas Eve. Hope you can make it. Should be interesting this year." The word interesting felt loaded. I texted back asking what he meant. He responded immediately. "Uncle Marcus has been acting weird. Obsessed with some financial mystery. Think he's going to make a big announcement or something." My stomach dropped. This was it. Marcus had found something, or thought he had. And he was planning to confront everyone at Christmas. I should have felt panicked. Should have been scrambling to figure out my response, my strategy, my defense. Instead, I felt something else entirely. Calm. Certainty. Readiness. My grandfather had prepared for this moment. Had built protections that couldn't be breached. Had given me not just wealth but the confidence that came with knowing I didn't need anyone's approval or understanding. If Marcus wanted to make Christmas Eve dramatic, fine. Let him try. I texted Brandon back. "I'll be there. Wouldn't miss it for the world." Then I called Fletcher one last time before the holidays. "I think it's about to happen," I told him. "I think Marcus is going to confront me at Christmas. Are you ready?" he asked. I thought about my grandfather's letter. About his challenge to let my actions speak louder than my account balance. About the choice between proving myself to people like Marcus or simply living well without needing their validation. "I'm ready," I said. "Whatever happens, I'm ready." "Good," Fletcher replied. "Then remember what your grandfather taught you. Real power doesn't announce itself. Simply is." We said our goodbyes and I drove home through the gray Portland December. My apartment felt smaller than ever, but also exactly right. This was the life I'd built with nothing. These were the choices I'd made when I thought I had no safety net. This was who Victoria Blake really was, stripped of family expectations and financial anxiety. And that person, I realized, was someone I actually liked. Someone my grandfather would have been proud of. Someone who didn't need $1 billion to prove her worth, but who could use $1 billion to prove what really mattered. Christmas Eve was in 2 weeks. I had time to prepare. Time to decide exactly how I wanted to handle whatever Marcus had planned. Time to figure out who I was going to be when the secret finally came out. But one thing I knew for certain. I wasn't the same person who'd sat at that anniversary dinner and let Marcus make me feel small. That Victoria was gone. The new one, the one my grandfather had been preparing for 15 years, was ready to emerge. And Marcus Blake had no idea what was coming. Christmas Eve arrived with unseasonable warmth, as if even the weather knew something significant was about to happen. I drove from Portland to Greenwich in my Honda, which now felt less like a symbol of my modest circumstances and more like a choice I'd made deliberately. The car ran fine. It got me where I needed to go. The fact that I could now afford to replace it with something that cost more than most people's houses was irrelevant. The Blake estate was decorated within an inch of its life. White lights wrapped around every tree and column. Wreaths on every door. A massive Christmas tree visible through the front windows, probably 12 feet tall and dripping with ornaments that likely cost more than my monthly salary. It looked like something from a magazine spread, beautiful in that sterile way that had nothing to do with actual warmth or joy. I parked between Brandon's Tesla and a Bentley I didn't recognize, probably belonged to some business associate Marcus had invited to witness whatever spectacle he had planned. As I walked to the door, I caught my reflection in one of the windows. I dressed carefully tonight. Not in designer clothes or obvious wealth, but in a simple black dress that fit well and made me feel confident. My grandmother's pearls at my throat, the only jewelry she'd left me before she died, back when I thought that was all I'd ever inherit from this family. Diane answered the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Victoria, how lovely you could join us. Everyone's in the main salon. I followed her through the familiar halls, my heels clicking on marble floors. Voices drifted from the salon, that particular pitch of conversation that happens when people are drinking expensive wine and pretending to enjoy each other's company. The room fell briefly quiet when I entered. Marcus stood by the fireplace, looking like the lord of the manor in a burgundy smoking jacket that probably cost $5,000. Brandon sat on one of the leather sofas with Natalie, both of them watching me with curious expressions. My mother perched in a corner chair, wine glass clutched tightly, eyes darting between me and Marcus like she was watching a tennis match. And seated in the chair that had been my grandfather's favorite, looking completely out of place, was a man I didn't recognize. Late 50s, gray suit, briefcase at his feet. Tori, Marcus said with exaggerated warmth. So glad you could make it. Come in, come in. Can I get you a drink? Just water, I said. I had a feeling I wanted to stay completely clear-headed for whatever was coming. Marcus raised an eyebrow but gestured to one of the servers hovering near the bar. Water for my niece. Always so sensible, our Tori. The words hung in the air with that same condescending tone he always used. But tonight, instead of making me feel small, they just felt tired. Predictable. Like watching an actor deliver the same lines in the same way, never realizing the performance had gotten stale. I took my water and sat in a chair near my mother. She reached over and squeezed my hand briefly, a gesture of support that told me she was worried about what was coming. Marcus cleared his throat. Now that we're all here, I thought we could take a moment before dinner to discuss some family business. He gestured to the man in my grandfather's chair. This is Gerald Hutchins, a forensic accountant I've had working on something rather interesting for the past few months. Gerald stood and gave a tight nod. He had the uncomfortable look of someone who'd been hired to do a job and was now regretting accepting it. A forensic accountant, Brandon said, leaning forward with interest. Uncle Marcus, what's this about? Marcus took a sip of his scotch, drawing out the moment. Well, as you all know, our grandfather William Blake was a brilliant businessman. He built Blake Industries from nothing and left us a legacy we've all worked hard to maintain and grow. Brandon and I have tripled the company's value in the 15 years since his death. Diane's charitable work has enhanced our reputation in the community. We've all contributed to keeping the Blake name synonymous with success. He paused, looking directly at me. All of us who chose to participate in the family business, that is. I met his gaze steadily, refusing to react. Go on, Uncle Marcus. I'm sure this story goes somewhere. His jaw tightened at my tone. Indeed it does. You see, several months ago, I was reviewing some old estate documents and I noticed something peculiar. The total value of Grandfather William's estate as it was distributed to Blake Industries and various family trusts didn't quite match up with the company's financial records from the years before his death. He pulled out a folder from beside his chair and opened it with theatrical precision. According to our internal records, the company was worth approximately $800 million when Grandfather died. Yet only $600 million was accounted for in the estate distribution, which left me wondering, where did the other $200 million go? The room was silent except for the crackling of the fire. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, though I had no idea why they'd assume I had anything to do with this. Unless Marcus had already decided I was guilty of something and was building his case backward. Gerald the accountant shifted uncomfortably. With Mr. Blake's permission, I began investigating. Following paper trails, examining old bank records, reaching out to financial institutions around the world. And what I discovered was quite remarkable. Marcus smiled, the expression predatory. It turns out that our grandfather had an entire separate fortune that none of us knew about. Accounts in Switzerland, holdings in various countries, investments completely divorced from Blake Industries. A fortune that he'd been building since before the company even existed. The room erupted. Brandon stood up. What? How is that possible? Diane's face had gone pale. Where is this money now? My mother said nothing. but I could feel her hand trembling where it still rested near mine. Marcus held up a hand for silence. That's the question, isn't it? Where did it go? Because as far as Gerald and I can determine, this fortune, which we estimate to have been worth at least $1 billion at the time of grandfather's death, simply vanished. Transferred to accounts we can't access, held in trusts with names we don't recognize, hidden behind privacy laws in countries that won't cooperate with our inquiries. He let that sink in before continuing. Now I've spent months trying to figure out who benefited from this hidden fortune. Who my grandfather trusted enough to leave it to. Who he thought deserved his private wealth while the rest of us got stuck with just the company. His eyes locked on mine. And I keep coming back to one person. The person he spent the most time with. The person he seemed to favor despite her complete lack of contribution to the family business. The person who's been acting strangely confident lately, talking about travel and seeming unbothered by her financial circumstances. I felt the weight of every gaze in the room shift to me. Brandon's mouth had fallen open slightly. Natalie was staring at me like I'd suddenly grown a second head. Diane looked furious. My mother's hand found mine again and squeezed hard. You think grandfather left me money, I said calmly. $1 billion worth. Marcus set down his glass with deliberate precision. I don't think Tori. I know. Gerald here has traced multiple transfers from William Blake's private accounts to a trust established in the name of Victoria Eleanor Blake. Your full name. A trust that matured on your 30th birthday, which was, if I recall correctly, just a few months ago. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, could feel my mother's hand shaking in mine, could sense the walls closing in as everyone waited for my response. This was the moment I'd been preparing for since that night at the anniversary dinner. The moment my grandfather had been preparing me for since I was 15 years old. I could deny it. Could lie and claim ignorance and force Marcus to prove something he'd never be able to prove completely. Could maintain the secret and go back to my quiet life, with everyone suspicious but no one certain. Or I could do what my grandfather had taught me. I could stand in my truth without apology or justification. Could refuse to let Marcus frame this narrative in a way that made me look guilty of something. Could take control of this moment instead of letting him orchestrate it. I took a sip of water, set the glass down carefully, and looked Marcus directly in the eye. You're right, I said quietly. The room exploded. Brandon jumped to his feet. Are you serious? You've had $1 billion this whole time? Diane's voice was shrill. This is outrageous. That money should have gone to the family, to the company. How dare William cut us out like that? Natalie just stared at me with her mouth open, clearly recalculating every interaction we'd ever had. And Marcus looked triumphant. Like he'd just won a game he'd been playing since before I even knew we were competing. I held up a hand, surprised when everyone actually quieted down. Let me be very clear about something. This money was never yours to begin with. Grandfather William made his fortune independently, long before Blake Industries became successful. He was under no obligation to leave any of it to the company or to any of you. But we're family, Diane protested. He should have divided it among all of us. Why you? Why should you get everything when you've contributed nothing? I felt something cold settle in my chest. There it was. The thing they'd been saying in 1,000 small ways for years, finally stated outright. That I was worth less because I'd chosen differently. That contribution only counted if it was the kind they valued. I stood up slowly, letting my 5'4" frame carry all the dignity my grandfather had spent years teaching me to embody. You want to know why me? I'll tell you exactly why. Because Grandfather William watched what this family did to people. He watched Marcus use money as a weapon to control everyone around him. He watched his sons turn his company into an empire built on making people feel small. He watched my mother lose herself trying to fit into a family that only valued her as an accessory to my father's name. My voice was steady, clear, carrying across the silent room. He watched me grow up being told I wasn't good enough, wasn't ambitious enough, wasn't Blake enough. And he made a choice. He chose to give his private fortune to the one person in this family who'd proven they didn't need money to know their own worth. The one person who'd built a life based on purpose rather than profit. The one person who reminded him of who he used to be before wealth corrupted everything he touched. Marcus's face had gone red. So you admit it. You've been lying to us for months. playing poor while sitting on $1 billion. You let me insult you at that dinner. Let me tell you that you were the poorest person in the room, and you said nothing. I smiled then, calm and cold. I said nothing because your opinion of my worth has never been based on reality, Uncle Marcus. You measure people by their bank accounts because you have no other meaningful way to evaluate them. Grandfather William knew that about you. That's why he made sure you'd never touch his private fortune. But that money should support Blake Industries, Brandon argued, standing beside his father now. It should grow the family legacy. The family legacy, I repeated. You mean the company that Grandfather William built, and then watched his sons turn into exactly what he never wanted it to be? A machine for generating wealth without purpose? A vehicle for Marcus's ego? How dare you? Marcus took a step toward me and I stood my ground. How dare I what? Tell the truth? Grandfather spent 15 years dead while you all assumed I got nothing. 15 years where you treated me like a charity case. Where you made me feel less than at every family gathering. Where you used my financial circumstances as proof that your choices were superior to mine. And not once did it occur to any of you that maybe, just maybe, he saw something in me that he didn't see in you. My mother spoke then, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in years. William told me once that Victoria was the only one of you who had a soul that money couldn't buy. I didn't understand what he meant at the time. Now I do. Everyone turned to stare at her. She stood up, walked over to where I stood, and positioned herself beside me. A united front. My daughter has spent years being told she wasn't good enough for this family, being diminished and dismissed and treated like her choices were failures. And she took it with grace while building a life that actually matters. Teaching students who need her. Making a real difference in real people's lives. So if William chose to leave his fortune to her, I say he chose exactly right. The pride in her voice brought tears to my eyes. This was the mother I remembered. The one who'd been buried under years of grief and compliance but was still there. Still fierce when it mattered. Diane found her voice again. This is absurd. We should contest this. There must be grounds to challenge the trust, to claim undue influence or mental incompetence. I looked at Gerald the accountant, who'd been silent through all of this. He cleared his throat uncomfortably. Actually, I reviewed the trust documents thoroughly. They're ironclad. Established 30 years ago when William Blake was in perfect health and sound mind. Multiple lawyers were involved. Everything was done properly and legally. There's no grounds for a challenge. Then we'll cut her off, Marcus said flatly. From the family. She's clearly not a true Blake if she can sit on that kind of wealth while watching the rest of us work to maintain the family business. I felt something break loose in my chest. Not pain exactly, but release. Go ahead, I said quietly. Cut me off. Disinherit me from a family I was never really part of anyway. Strike my name from whatever Blake registry you keep in your head. It won't change anything about my life, except that I won't have to pretend to enjoy these dinners anymore. You ungrateful little thing, Diane hissed. After everything this family has done for you. I laughed then, couldn't help it. Done for me? What exactly have you done for me, Aunt Diane? Besides make passive-aggressive comments about my salary and my life choices? Besides treat me like a disappointing obligation at every family gathering? Please enlighten me about all the support and generosity I've received from the Blake family. She had no answer. None of them did. Because the truth was they'd done nothing for me except make me feel inadequate. And now that I didn't need them, didn't need their approval or their conditional acceptance, they had no power left. Brandon tried a different approach. Look, Tori, maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. That money could do a lot of good if it was invested back into Blake Industries. We could expand, create jobs, build something Grandfather would be proud of. You'd be helping hundreds of people, not just yourself. I turned to him. You want to know what I'm doing with the money, Brandon? I've established an emergency fund for community college students. Single parents. Trying to get degrees. People working multiple jobs while taking classes. People who need just a little help to keep going. Last month alone, we helped 83 students stay in school who otherwise would have had to drop out. That's what I'm doing with Grandfather's money. Using it exactly the way he would have wanted. The room went silent again. Even Marcus seemed momentarily at a loss for words. That's very noble, he finally said, the word dripping with sarcasm. But it doesn't change the fact that you deceived this family. That you sat at our table and let us believe you were struggling while you had more money than all of us combined. I didn't deceive anyone, I corrected. I just didn't volunteer information about my private financial affairs. The same way I'm sure you don't tell me every detail about your investment portfolio or your bank balances. My inheritance from Grandfather William is my business. Not yours. Not the family's. Mine. Marcus moved closer, his face twisted with anger. You are exactly like him, you know that? Sanctimonious. Self-righteous. Acting like you're better than everyone else because you've decided money doesn't matter. But you know what? You're a hypocrite. You're living off that $1 billion the same as we live off our wealth. You're just pretending you're not. The accusation hit closer than I wanted to admit. There was some truth to it. I was wealthy now, whether I wanted to be or not. The question was what kind of wealthy person I would become. I met Marcus's eyes steadily. You're right that I have money now. A lot of money. More than I'll ever be able to spend. And yes, it makes my life easier. I don't have to worry about making rent or affording car repairs or whether I can retire someday. But here's the difference between us, Uncle Marcus. I didn't spend months hunting down this money because I was obsessed with tracking every dollar my grandfather had. I didn't hire a forensic accountant to prove that someone else had something I thought should be mine. I didn't call a family meeting on Christmas Eve to publicly shame someone for the crime of being chosen. I paused, letting that sink in. Grandfather William gave me this money because he knew I'd already figured out how to be happy without it. He knew I wouldn't use it to make other people feel small. He knew I wouldn't measure my worth or anyone else's by the size of their bank account. And he knew that when I had resources, I'd use them to help people instead of just accumulating more. That's the difference. Not the money itself, but what we do with it and why. The fight seemed to drain out of Marcus then. He looked older suddenly, deflated. You always were his favorite, he said quietly. Even when we were children, he looked at you the way he never looked at me or your father. Like you were special somehow. The vulnerability in his voice surprised me. For just a moment, I saw past the arrogance and cruelty to something sadder underneath. A man who'd spent his whole life trying to earn approval from a father who valued character over achievement. I'm sorry that grandfather made you feel that way, I said, and meant it. But the answer isn't to take it out on me. The answer is to look at why he felt that way. At what he valued that you weren't giving him. Marcus's face hardened again. Save your pity. I don't need it. What I need is for you to understand that you're no longer welcome in this family. You've made your choice. Now live with it. I looked around the room one last time. At Brandon and Natalie, still processing this revelation. At Diane, furious and calculating. At Gerald the accountant, looking like he wished he'd never taken this job. At my mother, standing beside me with tears in her eyes but her spine straight. And at Marcus, the architect of this confrontation, who'd thought he was exposing my secret when really he was just revealing his own emptiness. Hey, I said simply. If that's what you want, I'll go. But before I do, I want you all to understand something. Grandfather William didn't hide this money to hurt you. He did it to protect something he valued from people who wouldn't appreciate it. He spent 30 years building a fortune separate from Blake Industries, because he knew what the company would become under your leadership. He knew it would turn into exactly what it is now. A monument to ego instead of a vehicle for good. I picked up my purse, my mother's hand still in mine. He gave me this money because he saw that I understood what he'd learned too late. That wealth without purpose is just numbers on a page. That family built on obligation rather than love is just people who share a name. That the only legacy worth leaving is one that makes the world better than you found it. I started walking toward the door, my mother coming with me. Behind us, Marcus called out. You'll regret this, Victoria. Walking away from this family, from this legacy. You'll end up alone. I turned back one final time. Uncle Marcus, I've been alone in this family for 15 years. At least now I'm alone with peace of mind and $1 billion to help people who actually need it. The difference is I chose this. You're the one who's going to have to live with pushing away the only person Grandfather William thought worthy of his trust. We walked out together, my mother and me, leaving behind the glittering mansion and the angry voices and the family that had never really felt like family. The night air was cold and clean. Stars were visible despite the security lights flooding the driveway. My mother stopped beside my Honda and started laughing. What's funny? I asked. She gestured at the car. You have $1 billion and you're still driving this thing. I smiled. It runs fine. Why would I replace it? She laughed harder, almost crying now. Because you can. Because you never have to worry about money again. Because you're free, Tori. We both are. I looked at her. Are you really okay leaving? This has been your home for decades. The tears were flowing now, but she was smiling. This hasn't been my home since your father died. It's been a prison I chose because I was too scared to leave. But watching you stand up to Marcus in there, watching you refuse to apologize for being exactly who you are, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen. If you can do it, so can I. We stood there in the cold December night, two women who just walked away from everything we'd known. Two women who'd chosen freedom over acceptance. Two women who finally understood what my grandfather had been trying to teach us all along. That the only opinion that matters is your own. That wealth is a tool, not a measure of worth. That family is what you build, not what you're born into. Mom, I said slowly, how would you feel about moving to Portland? Starting fresh somewhere far from all of this? Her eyes widened. Really? You'd want that? I squeezed her hand. Grandfather left me enough for both of us to live however we want. No more asking Marcus for permission. No more walking on eggshells. Just us building the lives we actually want. She pulled me into a hug then, holding on like I was a life raft in a storm. Yes, she whispered. Yes, let's do that. Let's go build something real. We climbed into my Honda and drove away from the Blake estate for the last time. In the rearview mirror, I could see the house blazing with light, Christmas decorations glittering, looking perfect and empty. I didn't feel sad. Didn't feel angry or vindicated or any of the complicated emotions I'd expected. I just felt light, free, ready for whatever came next. My phone buzzed with a text from Fletcher. I assume by now your family knows. Are you all right? I texted back while my mother drove. We were heading toward a hotel for the night before the long drive to Portland tomorrow. Better than all right. I'm free. His response came quickly. Your grandfather would be so proud. Not because you're wealthy now, but because you understand that wealth doesn't define you. That was always his greatest lesson. One he wished he'd learned earlier himself. I looked over at my mother, humming softly to the radio as we drove through the Connecticut darkness. Looked down at my phone with its message from the banker who'd helped preserve my grandfather's legacy. Thought about my students waiting for spring semester. About the Opportunity Fund already changing lives. About all the possibilities that stretched ahead now that the pretense was over and the truth was out. This wasn't how I'd imagined this Christmas Eve would go. I'd thought maybe there would be a confrontation, but I'd expected to deflect and deny and maintain the secret. I hadn't expected to claim it so completely. To stand in front of my family and own every bit of my truth without apology or justification. But my grandfather had prepared me for this without my even knowing it. 15 years of building my own life. 15 years of learning that my worth wasn't determined by the Blake family's opinion. 15 years of becoming someone who could handle sudden wealth without losing herself. He'd given me time to become the person who could do what I'd done tonight. Walk away from acceptance in favor of authenticity. Choose freedom over belonging. Stand alone if that's what integrity required. And in doing so, I discovered I wasn't alone at all. My mother sat beside me, also choosing freedom for the first time in decades. Fletcher stood ready to help me use my grandfather's fortune for good. My students waited, unknowingly benefiting from a billionaire's belief in the power of education to change lives. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, I like to think my grandfather was smiling. Not because I'd won some battle against Marcus. Not because I'd gotten the last word in a family drama. But because I'd finally completely understood what he'd spent 15 years teaching me. That the only wealth that matters is the kind that makes you free. Not free to buy anything you want, though that was nice. But free to be exactly who you are without apology. Free to build the life that makes sense to you. Free to help others without needing recognition. Free to walk away from situations that diminish you. Free to choose authenticity over acceptance every single time. We checked into a hotel near the airport. Tomorrow we drive to Portland and start planning my mother's new life. But tonight, on Christmas Eve, we ordered room service and watched old movies and talked about everything we'd been afraid to say for years. She told me about the early days with my father, Before the Blake family had gotten their hooks in. About her art career, the galleries and shows, and the joy of creating something beautiful. About how grief and fear had slowly eroded her sense of self until she'd forgotten she was ever anything but Robert Blake's widow. I told her about my students, about the satisfaction of helping someone understand a difficult concept, about my tiny apartment and my simple life, and how happy I'd been even when I thought I had nothing, about my plans for the Opportunity Fund, the lives we could change, the difference we could make. And we talked about my grandfather, about his quiet wisdom, his disappointment in his sons, his hope that at least one of his descendants would understand that money was a tool, not a purpose. That wealth without meaning was just an expensive way to be empty. He saw that in you, my mother said as midnight approached. Saw that you had substance, that you wouldn't be corrupted by it. I think he saw it in you too, I told her. That's why he made sure you'd be taken care of through the company distributions. He knew you'd lost yourself for a while, but he believed you'd find your way back. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, do you think it's too late to find that person I used to be? I shook my head. It's never too late. You proved that tonight. Walking away from that house, from that life, that was the hardest thing you could have done. Everything else is just details. We fell asleep eventually, exhausted but peaceful. When I woke on Christmas morning, my first thought wasn't about the confrontation or the money or any of it. It was about my students. About getting back to Portland and preparing for spring semester. About expanding the Opportunity Fund to more schools. About using my grandfather's gift to build something that mattered. My phone had dozens of messages. Angry texts from Marcus and Diane. Confused messages from Brandon. A long email from Gerald the accountant apologizing for his role in the whole thing. And one text from an unknown number. I opened it cautiously. This is Mr. Fletcher. Merry Christmas, Miss Blake. Your grandfather included one final instruction in his papers. If his private fortune was ever discovered by the family, I was to give you this message. He knew this day would come eventually. Below that was a scanned image of a handwritten note. My grandfather's distinctive script. Dearest Tori, if you're reading this, then Marcus finally found what he was looking for. I'm sure he thought he was exposing your secret, taking you down a peg, putting you in your place. I'm sure he made quite a scene. I hope you handled it with grace. More importantly, I hope you handled it with truth. The note continued. Money is strange, Tori. It reveals who people really are. Some become generous. Some become cruel. Some become paranoid, obsessed with tracking every dollar, convinced that someone somewhere is getting more than their fair share. I watched my sons become that. Watched them turn my company into a machine for generating wealth without purpose. It broke my heart. But you, my darling girl, you understood from the beginning that money was just money. That it could make life easier but it couldn't make life meaningful. That the only wealth worth having was the kind that set you free to be exactly who you were meant to be. I'm proud of you. Not because you're rich now, though I'm glad my fortune went to someone who'll use it well. But because you built a good life when you thought you had nothing. Because you chose purpose over profit. Because you never let them make you small even when they tried so very hard. Whatever happened with the family, know that you made the right choice. The Marcus Blakes of the world will never understand that some things matter more than money. Don't waste your time trying to convince them. Just live well, love deeply, and use what I've given you to build something beautiful. All my love, always, Grandfather William. I read it 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Then I showed it to my mother. She cried too, clutching the phone like it was a lifeline to the past. He really did see us, she whispered. Both of us. Saw who we were under all the fear and grief and pretense. I nodded. And he gave us both a second chance. Mine came in money. Yours came in watching me use it. Now we both get to start over. We spent Christmas Day driving to Portland. Stopped for lunch at a diner in Massachusetts where the waitress called us honey, and the coffee was terrible, and everything felt wonderfully normal. Arrived at my apartment as the sun was setting, my mother looking around at my tiny space with new eyes. This is where you've been living, she said, not quite a question. This is where I've been happy, I corrected. And we can stay here as long as you want, or we can find somewhere new for both of us. Whatever feels right. She smiled, that real smile I remembered from childhood. Let's start here. Let me remember what it's like to live small before we decide if we want to live big. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. My mother found an apartment in my building. Started painting again, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. We had dinner together most nights, sometimes cooking, sometimes ordering in, always talking about everything we'd never said when we were both playing roles in the Blake family drama. I taught my spring classes, expanding the Opportunity Fund to 3 more community colleges in Oregon. Worked with Fletcher and Claire to develop a national network of emergency grants. Started a mentorship program connecting successful professionals with first-generation college students. The money made all of it possible. But the money wasn't the point. The point was building something that mattered. Creating opportunities for people who needed them. Proving that wealth could be a tool for good instead of a weapon for control. In February, Brandon called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Tori, his voice was subdued. I wanted to apologize for Christmas Eve. For all of it, really. Uncle Marcus was out of line. I was out of line. We all were. I waited. Apologies were easy. The question was what came after. I've been thinking a lot about what you said, he continued. About grandfather and why he chose you. About what the company has become. And I think you were right. We turned it into exactly what he didn't want it to be. A machine for making money without any real purpose behind it. I still didn't say anything. I also wanted you to know that I've left Blake Industries. Started my own thing, focusing on sustainable development. It's not going to make me as rich as the family business would have, but it feels better. Feels like something grandfather might have approved of. That's good, Brandon, I said finally. I'm glad you're finding your own path. There was a pause. Then are we okay? You and me? Can we maybe try to be family again in some small way? I thought about it. About grudges and forgiveness and the complicated weight of shared history. I think we can try, I said slowly. But it has to be real, Brandon. Not you checking in because you feel guilty or because you think you're supposed to. Only if you actually want a relationship based on honesty. I do, he said. I really do. So we started there. Careful phone calls every few weeks. Coffee when he was in the Portland area for work. Slow rebuilding of something that had never really existed before but might now. Marcus and Diane I didn't hear from. They'd made their choice and I'd made mine. Maybe someday there would be reconciliation, but I didn't need it. Didn't spend energy hoping for it. Some relationships aren't worth saving, and that's okay. In April, the foundation hosted its first national conference. 200 community college students receiving emergency grants, all gathering in Portland for a weekend of workshops and networking and celebration. I stood in the back of the conference hall, watching them connect with each other, share their stories, realize they weren't alone in their struggles. Fletcher had flown in for the event. He stood beside me, quiet as always. Your grandfather would have loved this, he said. Seeing his fortune used to lift people up instead of just accumulating in accounts. I smiled. I hope so. I hope he knows somehow that it mattered. That the long game he played, the 15 years of making me wait, all of it mattered. Fletcher glanced at me. You know, I've worked with wealthy families for 40 years. I've seen every possible way that money can corrupt, diminish, and destroy people. Your grandfather was one of the few who understood that wealth was a responsibility, not just an asset. And you, Miss Blake, you're carrying on that legacy beautifully. The words meant more than I could express. That night, the foundation hosted a dinner for the students. Just pizza and conversation in a casual setting, nothing fancy. But the room was full of laughter and hope, and the kind of authentic joy that money can't buy but it can make space for. One student, a woman in her 40s getting her nursing degree, pulled me aside. I just wanted to thank you, she said. The grant I received meant I didn't have to choose between my rent and my textbooks this semester. It meant my kids got to stay in their school. It meant I got to keep working toward my degree. You changed my life. I felt tears prick my eyes. You changed your own life, I told her. You're the one doing the work. I just removed a barrier. She hugged me tight. Sometimes removing barriers is everything. After everyone left, I walked back to my apartment alone. The Portland night was clear and cold. I could see stars through the city light, faint but present. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Sold a painting today. First one in 15 years. They want me to have a show next month. Can you believe it? I smiled and texted back. I absolutely can. Proud of you, Mom. At my apartment, I made tea and sat by the window. Looked out at the city I'd chosen, at the life I'd built, at the future stretching ahead full of possibility. My grandfather's $1 billion sat in accounts around the world, working quietly to create opportunities and change lives. The Blake family name was on none of it. Just the work, growing and spreading and making a difference. I thought about that anniversary dinner 6 months ago. About Marcus standing up and telling everyone I was the poorest person in the room. About my phone buzzing with Fletcher's call and the news that would change everything. About the choice I'd made to stay silent, to finish my meal, to let them think whatever they wanted. And about the choice I'd made on Christmas Eve to finally tell the truth, to stand in my power, to walk away from people who would never see my worth. Both choices had been right. Staying silent had given me time to adjust, to plan, to become sure of who I was with this wealth. Speaking the truth had freed me from the weight of other people's opinions. And now, 6 months later, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Teaching students who needed me. Running a foundation that mattered. Building a relationship with my mother based on honesty instead of fear. Living a life that felt authentic and purposeful in mine. The money was wonderful. It was. Having security and freedom and the ability to help people was a gift I'd never take for granted. But the real gift my grandfather had given me wasn't the $1 billion. It was the 15 years I'd spent thinking I had nothing. Those years had taught me who I was without wealth to define me. Had shown me what I valued and what I could build and who I wanted to be. The money just made it easier to be that person on a larger scale. I raised my teacup to the window, to the stars, to wherever my grandfather was. Thank you, I whispered. For the money, yes. But mostly for the time. For making me wait. For forcing me to become someone who could handle this without losing herself. For believing in me when no one else did. For playing the longest game and trusting I'd be ready when it ended. Outside, the city hummed with life. Inside, I felt peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you've made the right choices, even when they were hard. The kind of peace that comes from living authentically. The kind of peace that money can't buy but having money can protect. Marcus had been wrong about so many things. But he'd been right about one. That anniversary dinner had been historic. Just not because I was the poorest person in the room, but because it was the moment I finally understood I'd never been poor at all. I'd had something Marcus would never have. I'd had my grandfather's respect, my own integrity, and the knowledge that my worth had nothing to do with my bank account. And now I had $1 billion too. But that was just a bonus. The real wealth had been there all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.